So when I grew up, I didn't realize that I couldn't have named it this way at the time, but there was a tension between two ways of thinking. There was the way I learned in church, and there was the way I learned at home. And it wasn't that they were intentionally opposed. It wasn't that they would have even named it as such, because they probably understood it exactly the same way. But, so I grew up in San Antonio, and that is not unique to people who grew up in Texas, but I grew up with kind of this very independent mindset, to where you need to be able to do it on your own. And so I've told you all this before, one of my weaknesses is I have trouble asking for help. And part of the reason I have trouble asking for help is because, for better or worse, it was modeled that asking for help was a sign of weakness when I was growing up. Hey, now there was a lot of strengths I gained from this, because there were a lot of things I figured out by my parents being able to say, especially by the time I was in high school, I can't do that. You got to go figure it out by yourself. Because at that point I was wanting to go into studying engineering, and my father had not graduated college, my mother had not graduated college, and you're doing math well beyond what we ever did. So, I can't help you, son. You got to go figure this out on your own. But then at church, and especially growing up in a Lutheran church, they kept talking about grace. It's about what God does, and it's not about what you did. And I wouldn't have internalized that there was this tension between the two at that point. But, so much of my life at that point was, your grades are based on what you did. It's not what somebody else did, it's on what you did. And again, I think that there is sometimes this tension in our society too, because there are two competing definitions of what fairness is in our society. So one is everybody should have the same, and one is everybody should have the same based on how hard they work. So a person who works harder should get more. And those two are a tension in the world. Again, I can talk a lot more about this, but part of the political tension we deal with is that the political parties play to two different sides of that. And that's one of the reasons they sometimes don't talk to each other very well, is that this is my vision of fairness, this is my vision of fairness, but we never talk about what that vision is. And so when you're talking about two different things, two different starting points, and you have people who are saying, but why can't you see it my way? Well, because they're starting from a different starting point. Anyways. One of the times where this became clear to me was actually when I was just starting seminary. So I had been in the Army before going to seminary, and I knew 2 years before I left the Army that that's what I was going to do. And so, give me 2 years, I can make all kinds of plans. And so I had started putting money aside. We'd done a lot of different things, but I knew that going in, that I had made all these budgets, and this is how it's going to work, and all that kind of stuff. And I had a fatal flaw in my budget. So, remember, I've been in the Army for a lot of times. That meant I've been shopping at the commissary, which is cheaper than anywhere else. I didn't realize that. They used to give us these printouts every year of this is how much money that you would actually be making based on the benefits that we're giving you in the military. I always thought they were just completely out of their mind until I got out away from it, and I realized, no, they're probably underestimating this. So anyway, I made our food budget based on the food budget I've been able to do in the military. And so I get to Dubuque, Iowa, where I'm going to seminary. And that first week, and again, that first shopping trip is always a little bit bigger because you've had to let go of a lot of your staples especially when you move from Louisiana up to Iowa. So, you have to go back and you have to buy some of your basic spices, and you have to buy all your staples, your flour and your sugar and things like that. And so I get that first grocery bill, and I'm like, there is no way that this budget works out. I can see this from the first bill, that this is just not going to work. God, what in the world do you want me to do here? You're asking me to go to 3 years of this? And again, I had a lot of these conversations with God beforehand because my son had been born the year before. And it was one of these things to where, okay, I've got this nice, maybe not safe, but steady job. And everything works out. And there's this clear path for me. And then you want me to take this other way? How does this work? I can't tell you how it worked, but it did. I never went hungry. I never ran out of money. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it worked. There were some times where people I didn't expect would say, hey, was thinking about you, and I know you're going through seminary right now, and I'm going to send you a check for $100. And that type of stuff would just happen. So I get, when Jesus is there, and again, we switched from Mark's voice to John's voice this week, but they're both telling the same story, where Jesus has gone away, and the crowds keep following him anyway, and he sees the crowds, and the disciples are being very sensible as they send the people away. We can't feed 5,000 people. There's not enough food here anyway. There's no way this works. We know what our strength is. We know what, and they need to take care of themselves. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of you. And then grace enters in. And then God enters into the story. And Charlene, during VBS this week, was one of the stories she was telling, had this story in it, and the little boy who kept seeing, well, this person offered their house, this person offered their boat, I wish we had something to offer. And again, if Jesus is who people are saying he is, he can take something small and make something great out of it. And again, you have Andrew saying, well, we've got this boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus has everybody sit down. And I'm sure, and the disciples have seen lots of stuff at this point, because people are there because they've seen lots of stuff at this point, but they're probably all thinking, there's no way this works out. There's no way this ends well. And there is that point, and I love the line from Ephesians today, by the one who is able to do by the power of him in us far more than we are able to imagine. And again, I know that's part of the tension of faith, is that, sometimes our own imaginations get what gets in the way. God, I can only see this far. I can only imagine this much. I'm really good at seeing all the limits. And you're really good at going beyond. And so I'm sure there were lots of questions, lots of thoughts in integrity. They probably didn't voice it to Jesus, but okay, yeah, we'll get everybody to sit down, we'll get them all organized. And again, I can only imagine what it might have looked like for when Jesus is taking the bread and the fish, and well, how is there still more? How is there still more? And again, you start with, we can all imagine 5 loaves of bread. We can all imagine 2 fish. And I think we can all imagine 12 baskets. And we know that there's no 5 loaves and 2 fish that fill 12 baskets. But that's what was left over afterwards. I know I've spent a lot of the last couple of weeks thinking about, I need to do everything I can to make sure everything runs smoothly in this time where I'm going to be gone. And on the one hand, that's that first part of it. I want to do everything I can to shoulder the burden that I can, or to do everything and make it easy for everybody else. But part of my life is also learning to trust. It's for me learning to trust, but I think it's also for us as people of faith learning to trust. It will be okay. it will be just fine. In fact, it'll probably be better than we thought it would be. That God is able to take the things that we are able to give and do far more with them than what we thought they were able to do. And so, again, I'm following a pattern. I did not plan this particular reading for this day. This is the schedule of readings that I would normally have gone by anyway. But I think it's kind of fitting that here at this point where the people gathered around Jesus had no idea how it was going to work. And it worked. And I'm sure that they all had their plans. But God is able to do far more than what we limit God to sometimes. And so that's my prayer for this time as well. Is that both for me and for y'all, that in this time, the God who is at work within us is able to do far more than what we imagine. That we find out things about ourselves and about this community that surprise us. And that, it doesn't have to rest on any one person's shoulders, because when Christ is here, the resources will be enough. The gifts we bring will be enough. We will be enough.